I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, defiant pose. Former President Donald Trump is processed at an Atlanta jail amid charges related to the 2020 election. We have the latest. Budget battle. A group of House Republicans are pushing back regarding U.S. aid overseas. We're on Capitol Hill. Hope of the peripheries. A preview of the Holy Father's trip next week to an East Asian nation with very few Catholics. And full of grace. A reporter tells us about his incredible discovery amid the wildfires in Hawaii. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. Our top story tonight, while President Joe Biden continues his vacation in Nevada, it is former President Donald Trump who is making the headlines tonight, all for a picture taken of him last night, a mugshot, and his response on social media. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, former President Donald Trump's history-making mugshot was taken in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where he's accused of conspiring to overturn his election laws. And now that mugshot is being used by his campaign to help raise money and to try to help him win a second term.
Donald Trump's mugshot. The former president posted a photo of it along with the words, "Election interference, never surrender." Merchandise bearing the mugshot now on his presidential campaign website. Shirts, $34. Coffee mugs, $25. And he writes, "If you are doing poorly due to the sinister people in control of our country right now, don't even think about donating. But if you can, please make a contribution to evict crooked Joe Biden from the White House and save America during this dark chapter in our nation's history." Meanwhile, as President Biden tries to stay in the White House, this pro-abortion ad goes after Donald Trump.
First of all, I'm the one that got rid of Roe v. Wade.
The campaign ad goes on to say President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are determined to restore Roe v. Wade, adding,
"As long as they are in office, decisions about your body will be made by you, not by them."
But National Right to Life tweeted, "Be assured and without doubt or reservation, Democrats support limitless abortions up to the moment of birth. They support chemical abortions, late-term abortions, partial birth abortions, dismemberment abortions, and more. It's who they are." Vice President Harris has traveled the country promoting what the administration calls reproductive rights, but today she was back in the East Room of the White House welcoming the best in women's basketball, the Las Vegas Aces, 2022 WNBA champs. Today, a celebration of their success on the court.
In addition to being champions on the court, these leaders are role models and leaders off the court.
Now, President Biden and the First Lady are scheduled to fly back here to the White House from Reno, Nevada tomorrow night. And then on Monday, the President and Vice President will observe the 60th anniversary of the historic March on Washington. Around 250,000 people gathered at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial all those decades ago to hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. deliver his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, there is a growing possibility of a government shutdown on October 1st. That's because a group of about 36 House Republicans is drawing a red line on government spending. Their votes are critical and time is short. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest.
Good evening, Tracy. Congressional leaders say that they're eyeing a short-term fix to allow lawmakers to pass about a dozen government spending bills. But members of the House Freedom Caucus say that they are vowing to oppose that. They don't want any spending bill to pass without their priorities. The Freedom Caucus put out a statement this week saying in part, quote, "In the eventuality that Congress must consider a short-term extension of government funding through a continued resolution, we refuse to support any such measure that continues Democrats' bloated COVID-era spending. Failure to pass a CR by October 1st would result in a government shutdown."
From a spending standpoint, and we could agree to cut our spending to take just a modest step towards in the direction of fiscal responsibility. However, if there are those who have that responsibility that refuse to honor that responsibility, and then we should use a government shutdown as a leverage point.
And Congressman Chip Roy insists conservatives must take a stand.
So you use that power of the purse to force change. That's what it's about, not crawling up in a ball crying, "Oh my God, they're going to say government shutdown." Go do your job. Our job is to use the power of the purse to force change.
The caucus warns it will oppose a clean CR and any bill that doesn't include the House passed Secure the Border Act of 2023, address the weaponization of the Justice Department and FBI, and end woke policies in the Pentagon. The Freedom Caucus also states it opposes a blank check for Ukraine aid in any supplemental appropriations bill that's likely to include billions more in domestic emergency aid.
We'll be authorizing in the same bill, in all likelihood, considerable increase for FEMA.
FEMA needs more money due to extensive damage caused by flooding in California and New York and deadly fires in Hawaii. After the House Freedom Caucus announced their demands, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries posted, quote, "House Republicans are determined to shut down the government and crash our economy. We will fight these MAGA extremists every step of the way for the people." House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is in a tough spot. Democrats are unlikely to vote on any short-term spending bill that includes any of the Freedom Caucus demands. If the demands are not met, members of the House Freedom Caucus may consider a vote to replace Kevin McCarthy. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A federal judge says that West Virginia can restrict access to abortion pills. This after the state's near total abortion ban was passed in September 2022. The manufacturer of a generic abortion drug argued that it should be available because it's FDA approved. The ruling says the abortion ban takes precedence over any government approvals. An Australian court is allowing a civil case to proceed against the Archdiocese of Melbourne. The suit involves abuse allegations against the late Cardinal George Pell. Cardinal Pell maintained his innocence until his death earlier this year. Our final preparations are underway for the Holy Father's trip next week to Mongolia. Pope Francis will be the first pope ever to visit the East Asian country. Mongolia has a population of around 3.5 million people. The majority are Buddhist. Very few are Catholic. EWTN News Vatican Correspondent Colm Flynn has more.
A very good evening, Tracy, from Ulaanbaatar, the capital city of Mongolia. Well, this is an expansive and vast country, but with a very small population, only about 3.4 million people. And of that 3.4 million people, a tiny percentage is Catholic. We're talking around 1,000 people. And yet this is where Pope Francis will arrive in less than a week and spend a number of days meeting the Catholics here and the missionaries who have helped to rebuild the church here in the past 30 years. Because remember, after the collapse of communism and when Mongolia was under Soviet rule, when that ended in 1992, religious orders were able to come back to Mongolia. And it was only 3 religious missionaries, Catholic missionaries, 2 from the Philippines, 1 from Belgium, who came and they started from scratch. When you look at the religious community here, there are around only 80 priests and nuns, 80 in total, and most of them are foreign missionary workers. Only 2 are actually Mongolian. And talking to them today, Tracy, we've been able to get a fascinating insight into how the Catholic Church here operates and the great challenges that it faces in Mongolia today, because even though in the country's constitution they claim to have religious freedom, things like obtaining visas for missionary workers who want to come to the country, Catholic ones, can be quite difficult. They're often rejected, whereas other religions like Buddhism and Shamanism, their visas go unhindered. And then when you look at people trying to obtain permits to build new churches or to build auxiliary buildings in the Catholic Church, many of those permits as well are blocked. So the challenges are great. But we met a Catholic family today who live in the capital city, the Augustina family, a husband and wife and a son and daughter. And I asked them what made a Mongolian family convert to the Catholic Church when it's not in their tradition, it's not in their culture. And they told me, Colm, we grew up under communism when the Soviets were in power here, and we know what it is like to have no religion in any shape or form. So now they hold very dearly and with great value their Catholic faith. And they said, Colm, simply, we see the truth in it. So they, of course, are looking forward very much to the visit of Pope Francis. But when he comes here, it may be a small church. It is vibrant, with the people that it does have, and also does incredible work in its outreach. Many people live here in poverty in the capital city, 1.5 million people, half of the population of the country. So it is the Catholic Church who is looking after those most vulnerable and those most in need. For example, with one of the biggest orphanages in the city. But it will be fascinating to see, Tracy, what this visit of Pope Francis, the Holy Father, will do for the Catholic Church and the Catholic community here in the country, and for the wider country of Mongolia in general. We'll be covering it here, and we'll talk to you again over the next few days. But until now, in Mongolia, this is Colm Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
All right, thank you, Colm. Now, hundreds of Catholics gathered outside of a decimated church in Pakistan to celebrate Mass. One Christian community leader said that most of the more than 700 attendees were crying. The service followed riots and destruction of Christian sites in Pakistan. The government has arrested more than 160 people accused in the attack. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including threat from China. Taiwan sends accusations towards China ahead of the island's upcoming election. And strengthening ties. 6 nations join China and Russia's summit as tensions rise between the East and Western countries. Taiwan's vice president is accusing China of unfairly trying to influence the island's upcoming election.
Beijing engaged in unfair trade practices against our agricultural products, potentially in an effort to undermine the coming elections.
Beijing announced this week that it would suspend mango imports from Taiwan after allegedly detecting insects on the fruit. William Lai, who you just heard from right there, is the current vice president of Taiwan and a presidential candidate in the upcoming election. The elections are set for January 2024. Well, Iran and Saudi Arabia are among the 6 new countries set to join an economic group known as BRICS.
مطمئناً فواید عضویت جمهوری اسلامی ایران در گروه BRICS.
Iran's president celebrated the decision, saying that joining the bloc will, quote, make history. He also hailed the group's attempts to replace the U.S. dollar as trading currency. BRICS was established back in 2009 and currently consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And joining us now to talk more about this is Joel Griffith, research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Joel, always great to have you on. First off, for those who may not be familiar, quickly tell us more about the bloc known as BRICS and why it was formed. What's the goal?
Well, the goal is to be a counterweight to the United States and to our Western trading partners. And this is a very large group. Now, the number of countries, of course, is small, but they represent nearly half of the world's population. And if you look at the gross domestic product of those member countries, about $1 in $3 of global output is actually created in those countries, which means that altogether, that's an economy bigger than the United States. So why this is important to us is because if they actually decide to start doing their trade in currency other than the U.S. dollar, well, that could actually add to the inflationary pressures that we're already experiencing here at home.
Yeah, Joel, and as you know, I mean, India and the UAE recently signed an agreement to trade in local currencies. Why the switch there? And do you think we'll see more of that? And then again, if so, you know, what impact could this have on the U.S. dollar?
Well, for many decades now, the United States dollar has been the currency of choice for international trade. If you look, even going back just 15 years, nearly 3/4 of all reserves held by foreign countries are actually held in U.S. dollars. And that number has been plummeting as of late. In fact, for the first time in many decades, fewer than half of all global reserves are still held in U.S. dollars. And this is in part because we have weaponized our dollar. And if you look at what we did over the past few years trying to push back against Russia, we froze a lot of Russian assets that were held in dollars, and other countries are beginning to take note, concerned that the United States might try to push our, whether our foreign policy agenda or even our social agenda, using our dollar as a weapon. And that's a big part of the reason why the reserves held in U.S. dollars have actually declined. And that's important to us because trillions of dollars are held in reserve in foreign countries. And when those dollars are held in reserve, well, that means those dollars that have been printed aren't chasing goods and services. If these foreign countries begin to release those reserves, well, that's going to be more upward price pressure, something that we're all struggling with right now.
Yeah, very, very concerning. You know, something else I want to touch on, as we mentioned, there are 6 new countries that are set to join BRICS come 2024, and a number of them are Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. Those are some of the top oil producers in the world, not to mention Russia is already in BRICS. That said, what type of impact could this alliance have on the global energy market?
Well, these are very important energy producers. You mentioned, of course, Saudi Arabia and Russia. We see a lot of these countries over the past few years that are into oil production. They've had to circumvent United States attempted sanctions on Russia. And Russia's found other ways to actually derive that energy. And China is concerned as well. China's actually a net energy importer, and China is concerned about also future ramifications of having to trade oil in U.S. dollars. And so that's what we see right now. We see countries like Saudi Arabia teaming up with other oil producers, trying to make sure that other countries that are hostile to our interests have a way to obtain their energy resources should the United States attempt to impose sanctions.
Joel, almost out of time, but I want to pivot here directly in the United States. Earlier today in meetings in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the interest rates may need to rise even more if the U.S. economy is going to be strengthened. I want to get your take on this, break this down for us, and what this means for us as consumers.
Well, Chair of the Federal Reserve Jerome Powell today once again refused to acknowledge that it's his own Federal Reserve that has actually created the inflation that we're experiencing. The Fed chair talked about housing prices and failed to acknowledge that part of the reason housing prices have risen is because the Fed printed nearly $2 trillion just to purchase mortgage-backed securities, which drove up home prices. So the Fed right now, what they're trying to do is they're trying to ensure that the trillions of dollars that it printed that are now on deposit in banks, they're trying to deter banks from lending out those dollars because that multiplies and it would drive up inflation every more. So what the Fed is trying to do by raising interest rates, they're trying to contain the damage from the problem that they created. We're all suffering for it, and it's time that politicians stress to the people that Republicans and Democrats passing bloated spending bills the last few years, those bills were financed by the printing presses of the Federal Reserve. And that is why families are experiencing the worst economic misery of the past 50 years.
Well, Joel, we are going to leave it right there. Always great to get your insights. Always appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, sound the alarms. Firefighters struggle to keep wildfires at bay in Greece. Plus, why this statue of the Blessed Virgin is a sign of hope in Maui. At least 21 people are dead amid wildfires in Greece. Firefighters are struggling to contain the blazes, most just outside of the country's capital. Parts of Athens are being evacuated. The fires began nearly 1 week ago. They are torching homes and even one national park. On new developments in the devastating wildfires in Hawaii. Late last night, officials released the names of 388 people still missing. This after a separate list of more than 1,700 people previously unaccounted for were deemed safe and well. Good news has been few and far between since the tragedy struck Hawaii, but there are stories of hope and redemption, and they continue to emerge. Here now with us is Jordan Segundo, an anchor and reporter with CBS 13 in Sacramento, California. He was also born and raised in Hawaii. Jordan, so good to be with you today. I know that you were recently in Hawaii reporting on the devastating wildfires. I'm sure that must have been so hard for you on a number of levels. That said, if you don't mind, can you talk to us a little bit about that experience?
You know, it was definitely a very emotional experience for me. I was born and raised in Hawaii on the island of Oahu, but I have relatives that live on Maui. I've been here in Sacramento working for the CBS station up here for almost 5 years. So when this devastation happened, I was out on a live shot, and I remember hearing the news of the morning, really not really paying attention to it, just thinking, okay, there was a fire, until I got on the phone with my auntie and she told me that Front Street was completely gone. So it was really hard to believe in that sense. And the station decided to send me out there to Maui to cover the story for about a week and a half. And it was just so hard to see the devastation up close, right there in front of my eyes. Just to see the heartache that these people have been dealing with is absolutely just so hard to fathom. And, you know, I've never been in a war zone, but that's all I could say. It looked like the entire town just completely wiped out, home after home, business after business, basically wiped off the map in just minutes, you know, in a day. So it was tough to see, but I was honored and grateful that I had the chance to get home there and share the stories of the people and really, you know, get into the community there.
Yeah, and it is so important to share those stories, especially sort of being boots on the ground over there. I know that you posted a lot of updates on social media. Also, you posted some really incredible images, one in particular of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a statue still standing practically unharmed right in the midst of complete devastation in a burned out neighborhood. When you saw that, Jordan, I mean, what did you think? And how did some of the people react there as well by seeing that?
You know, I had chills that the day kind of just mapped out. We were at a donation center that morning, and I with my photojournalist, Brian, and I knew that we wanted to get as close as we could to the devastation for our live shots that afternoon. We had been at a park the day before, right above that neighborhood. It's called Lahaina Luna. It's right under the high school, right above Front Street. And we saw a few people kind of walking around, and we thought, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's get to that area and see if we can walk in, because they were still closing it off to only residents. And we got there that afternoon, was able to walk into the neighborhood where half of it was, the homes are still standing. And then there's a line where it seems like the fires just kind of started or jumped over, and the homes from that line all the way down to the ocean just gone. And so we walked through the neighborhood. We talked to a few of the residents there, and it was amazing with the interviews that I was getting. Everyone sort of had there was a sadness, but a positivity in the sense of they had their faith. They talked about being close to God. And we ended up in front of this one home, and this nice little lady came out. Everyone in Hawaii, we call them auntie or uncle. So I called her auntie, and she came out and she started telling us her story about escaping the fires and having to hold on to the trees because the winds were so hard. And I remember turning around and saying, yeah, but your view is of your neighbor. And she pointed that out. She goes, but look who's standing in front of my home and protecting my house. And it was the Virgin Mary statue. And I get chills just even talking about it now, because in that moment when I turned around and I saw that, it was just like, we were guided here for this very reason. So the rest of the afternoon, we did our live shots there, showed the people here in Sacramento and through our newscast that, you know, despite the devastation and the rubble and ash, there was this sign of hope. And it was just right there for us to see. And you know, we had birds around it. We couldn't have asked for a moment, but it just really shown me that, you know, these people here have been going through such a dark time, but they all somehow, they're still holding on to their faith, and that's getting them through. And that was just that amazing moment that I shared online and throughout. And it's just been incredible, people seeing it, you know, holding on to that faith that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you also had a really powerful conversation with a man who saw his church burning down, kind of a blessing in disguise, I guess. He said, quickly, if you can tell us about that interaction. And we're just about out of time, but this is so important to hear.
Sure. You know, unfortunately, there are churches within the Lahaina community that burned down. Some are actually still standing, but that one man said, you know, this was a blessing in disguise. Our church was a very old church, so we couldn't expand on it because of the historic rules and regulations. But now that we have a brand new slate, maybe we can now build our church back up to welcome in more people from the community. Because he said with an incident like this, it's time for everyone to get close to God. And I think the signs and the symbols of hope that we saw throughout Lahaina, I think whatever people believe in will encourage them to really believe in something greater, you know, and something that can help them through such a dark time.
Absolutely. Jordan, any quick final thoughts before we let you go?
You know, being born and raised in Hawaii and seeing the devastation, I just want to thank everyone across the world for the love and the support that has been given to the people of Hawaii and Maui. It's such a small community, but the love that we feel it tremendously, even if it's through prayer. So I just ask for your continued prayers and your guidance as we, as a world, as a community, as humanity, come together in these tragic times.
Yeah, and we definitely are praying for everyone. And thank you, Jordan, so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us. We appreciate it. And thank you for your reporting. God bless you.
My pleasure.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.